Welcome to this degenerate Friday edition of Bury Your Bookie. Weren't with you yesterday. We had certain members of the crew atoning for all sins there, celebrating or observing Yom Kippur, and I managed to do it too because it didn't take long for me to make up the other 364 days of pure and utter scumbag nonsense that I. There's little hope for me on that front, I'm not a big believer in that. But nonetheless, we weren't able to be with you, and so here we are today, and on the precipice, right on the cusp of another big weekend of both college and professional football. We're going to dive into the college ranks today here with our good friend, the professor, who joins us once again. Professor, how are you?
I guess I'm doing the atonement thing too because 2 weeks ago, last time we did a show,
Yeah.
was a disaster of a week. So hopefully we will turn it around this week.
Well, we're hoping so, and of course, right, we're going to start right here with a game that is of great concern for fans of the University of Miami. They take on one of their arch rivals.
I don't know how much of a concern it is.
In what sense?
I mean, look, if Miami were to drop this game, they still have a very soft schedule moving forward,
Okay.
and still a very clear path into the ACC championship game. Which you're looking at the ACC. I think Georgia Tech's a very solid football team. I think Florida State may or may not be a very solid football team. So if you're Miami, your path is still very live in terms of the playoffs. So it's a big game. You certainly want to win. You want to maintain that high ranking, particularly as the SEC, continues to knock itself off over and over again. So you may be able to actually play your way into a bye. Uh, but I don't think it's you know basically it's the new situation in college football. There's like no life or death anymore. Even if you're Penn State and every time you play a quality team, you get your ass kicked like you did last weekend.
Yeah.
And I know people can say, "Oh, is it overtime game?" It was It was a miracle. It was an overtime game.
Yes.
Oregon badly outplayed them, and then your bum of a quarterback threw a pick in the overtime. Like you shouldn't have been in that game in the first place. You got your butt kicked once again, but you're still deep in the thick of the playoff chase. Like that's just the new reality of college football. Is like you're pretty much always in it.
Yeah. Concern from the standpoint, though, arch rivalry, maybe the biggest that the Hurricanes have. You could make the case for the Gators, but they don't play every year anymore as they used to. FSU got off to this red hot start where they defeat Alabama as two touchdown underdogs. And then against two cupcakes, they put up 143 points in two ball games, which was an eye opener. And it looks like Castellanos all of a sudden, that was a pretty fat price we were getting on him a few weeks back at 25 to 1 to win the Heisman.
I
I
assume
don't know
it's a
if
fat price again after last week.
yeah, well, if you're looking at it, I mean, he did make some spectacular plays at the end of the game. Certainly, that conversion to get them into overtime was big.
It was one very questionable call by the officials from tying the game up in double overtime.
Yes, I actually thought the replay caught the correct response there because
You're
there
gonna
was that
disagree.
one final bobble just as he was stepping out of bounds. And I mean, look, you're looking at a team that would have been undefeated going into this game. I don't know if that impacted the line, but by the narrowest, most infinitesimal of margins, they ended up losing a game where they didn't perform very well at the outset. But
I think it maybe moved it a point and a half. I think Miami still would have been favored somewhere in the 2.5 to 3 range if Florida State wins that ball game and over. Now, if they had gone out and beaten Virginia by 5 touchdowns, we might be looking something closer to pick them. But I still think Miami would have been somewhere around a field goal favorite had Florida State pulled that game out in overtime. I will also disagree on that call.
there was that one last bobble. The ball just popped out of his hands
See,
by
I
the.
didn't feel they had a camera shot that showed for sure it wasn't a catch, and it was called a catch on the field. And this is really my biggest problem with college football officiating right now is that, like, unlike the NFL, who very much goes by the what rule the way it's written, if it's not blatantly obvious in the replay, the call on the field stands. I feel like college football, the refs and the replay crew are just kind of making it up as they go along. And like, we feel it wasn't a catch. So even though we don't have a shot that definitively proves it, we're going to say it wasn't a catch and we're going to reverse the call on the field.
Zapruder film analysis. I watched it. I was rooting for it to be a catch because I was hoping FSU would go into this game undefeated, and I would have to respectfully disagree. I thought
That's
there was
fine.
just slightly enough there. I mean, as painful as it was, to go ahead and overturn the call because the ball just he lost his grip on the ball just again as he was going out of bounds. But yeah, they did call it a touchdown on the field, so it was certainly of a questionable variety. The end result, we don't know that FSU would have gone on to win the game had they ruled that a touchdown, but they clearly were in it with a chance after they rallied at the end. All right, so in an analysis of this game, looking at it, we have the explosive play capabilities of Castellanos and FSU. You have the fact that it's at night at Doak Campbell, not an easy place to play. We know Carson Beck has been in big ball games in the SEC, so that shouldn't scare him too much. Professor, was at that Florida game with the University of Miami, and I was underwhelmed, even though
I
Miami
mean,
won the
a
game.
lot of people were because
Yeah,
Florida looked so bad offensively outside of like two drives in the mid to late third quarter. And they wanted Miami to win that game by 100 points. But Miami came out with a game plan
they weren't dominant.
much like Notre Dame, where they felt we can win this game in the trenches with our offensive and defensive line, and that's what we're going to do. And I think Miami's basically had a very conservative offensive philosophy
Yes, they
up
did.
until this week, and part of the reason is they haven't been pushed.
Okay.
They went in against teams who were trying to win the game along the line of scrimmage. I don't think Florida State does that. If you look at the history of Gus Malzahn's not trying to win games by having his offensive line push people around. Gus Malzahn's the guy who wants to give you, you know, motion and formation and do as many things to trick your defense into getting out of position than hit you with an explosive play. Now, I would say that to some degree neutralizes Miami's biggest strength, which is the defensive line, because they're not going to have Thomas Castellanos sit in the pocket and wait for Ruben Bain to come along and knock his kidneys out of his body from behind. They're going to move the pocket. They're going to move Castellanos. They're going to try to create mismatches. They're going to try to get the defensive backfield, whether it's on a pass, a play action, or jet sweep motion, or by over leverage to bust. And Miami's defensive backfield has shown it will produce some bust. It showed it in the last quarter against Notre Dame. It showed it a couple times against Florida. I think Florida State's going to score points. Now, on the other hand, after watching that Virginia game where FSU's front seven just got absolutely bullied by a Virginia team that, on top of everything else, was missing two starters on its offensive line, I don't know that they're stopping Miami very often either. Like, Miami, I think, probably can just run the ball down their throats if it presents it. And, again, Carson Beck, he hasn't tried to do too much, but we know he's got a good arm and he's very accurate. And he's obviously an experienced veteran quarterback who's not going to make stupid mistakes. I think if they get into a situation where he has to make some plays, he will be capable of doing that. I'm looking for kind of a shootout here. So I would trend towards the over. I probably wouldn't play a side, but if you put a gun in my head to make a pick, I'd take Miami with a lot of trepidation. But I feel like a game probably played in the high 20s, low 30s, and at 54 and a hook, I would take the over. Excuse me.
All right, Professor, with a lean towards the over in that game. Which way would you go? You mentioned the proverbial gun to your head on the 4.5 points.
I would take Miami.
Okay.
But like I said, very trepidatiously.
Yeah. I mean, I could easily see this being a field goal game. So the 4.5 is kind of looming large there with an ominous flash. But
I see this as a red zone game. In that I think both teams are probably going to go up and down the field, and it's going to be who can execute better in the red zone. And that's where I come back to Miami's defensive line, because the bad news for a Malzahn offense is you can show all the formations, you can show all the motion. As the field compresses, it gets tougher and tougher for someone to bite. So the conclusion I see is probably FSU kicking a couple field goals where Miami can just play bully ball in the red zone and get a couple touchdowns out of it. So again, I personally wouldn't play a side, but if you're going to make me, I would take Miami.
Okay, and that would be for us anyway here in South Florida. Certainly a marquee game, and it's going to be prominently watched, and there'll be a lot of action on, I'm sure, around the country as well. All right, you do have four games that you're going to select for us here today with conviction, and it starts with Iowa State and Cincinnati.
Noon kickoff. Cincinnati currently laying 1.5 points. Iowa State, if you've watched them at any point, particularly that week 0 game against Kansas State, they're really not explosive, but they're good at two things which are absolutely crucial to the sport of football. They convert third downs and they stop other teams from converting third downs. I personally would not have made this number here. I would have made it more like Iowa State -1.5 or 2. I would have flipped this line. I'm not fully bought into Cincinnati. Yes, they probably should have beaten Nebraska in week 1, and they should probably beaten 4-0. But they haven't really beaten anybody that impressive. The quarterback, he's a nice dual threat, but he's not that lethal in the passing game. In Iowa State, as we know, pretty much the entire time Campbell's been there, has been very good at preventing explosive. They force you to do it, on 10, 12, 14 play drives if you're going to beat them. I don't think Cincinnati will be able to execute because they don't run the ball all that well under those circumstances. I like Iowa State to win a close game straight up, but we'll take the 1.5 because this is definitely a game that could land, I don't know, 21-20 or some nonsense along those lines. But we do like the Cyclones, who, let's be honest, have also established kind of a winning tradition under Campbell and are thoroughly in the mix for the Big 12 title here. So this is a big game for them.
All right, Alabama takes on Vanderbilt. Much respect, including Nick Saban saying he has high praise for Vanderbilt and what they've done. A team going in the right direction and seems to be well coached, well prepared. Alabama snaps a 33-game home winning streak for the Georgia Bulldogs, wins that game, seemed to be in command, and then it got a little tight at the end, but nonetheless, very impressive turnaround from their opening season loss in Tallahassee when they lost by 2 touchdowns, and everybody was all over the board once again saying, well, he's no Nick Saban, but
and he's not. They're a different kind of football team. Again, the hallmark of Nick Saban, defense and running the football. This defense looks kind of mediocre, and they do not run the ball well. This is a very West Coast DeBoer's imprint on it kind of team, particularly now that he has a pocket passing quarterback. Now, Alabama was great in pass protection against Georgia. I don't know how much of that is Georgia not being the level we're used to seeing along the defensive line and with their edge rushers. And how much of that is Alabama's offensive line is just great at pass protection. I guess we'll see a little bit here. I just think the number's too big here. I think people are overreacting to Alabama having beaten Georgia when, honestly, Kirby Smart just can't seem to beat Alabama. Generally speaking, throughout the course of his tenure at Georgia. So I'm not going to make that big. I think, as a matter of fact, Alabama had won something like 5 of their last 6 or 4 of their last 5 at Athens. So it wasn't that big a surprise. I like this Vanderbilt team, and on top of it, call it what you want, call it luck, call it, having a game plan. They seem to be a team that is very fortunate on the turnover factor, and we've talked about it. There's just certain things in sports that seem once whether it's winning close games or turnovers, once you get it rolling in the momentum of a season, it seems to just continue and continue and continue. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Vandy win that battle again. I don't think they're going to go in and win this game after, Alabama's obviously got revenge on their mind, but I do think they're going to make a very strong game of it. So at 11 and a hook and seemingly rising, I would definitely take Vanderbilt.
All right, taking Iowa State, getting 1.5 points, taking Vanderbilt, getting 11 and a hook from Alabama. You're also looking at Texas and Florida, and you're looking at it from the standpoint that we look at a lot of things that are going on in the government today, like how could this possibly be the case? And you do have a lot of people, as you were referencing when we were discussing this earlier, that think Florida has a big shot in this game.
Yeah, a lot of people in the college football business and the picks business seem to be on the Florida Gators. It's probably the reason the line is down at 5.5 off a 6.5 open. I saw it at a couple of places at 4, as low as 4.5 yesterday. So you might get Another drop today as the early money all seems to be on the Gators side here. I don't understand the logic. I keep very well. The Gators defense is good. They'll keep them in the game. Blah blah blah. Number one, yes, the Gators defense is good. It's not great. It's good. And number two, you seem to be forgetting Texas's defense is really good. And for all of Texas's offensive struggles, which are for a team who came in some people's number one team in the country, it's true. Florida's offense is rotten. Like Florida,
Horrendous.
again, and have they played a couple of good teams? Yes, they have. But you're talking about a team that got physically beaten up at home by the University of South Florida. Like,
Yes.
and again, no disrespect to USF. They're having a good season. I like the way that program is headed at the moment, but the talent level is not comparable.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're talking about a Texas team that's got, I don't know, probably 12 to 14 guys who are going to play in the NFL. I look for Texas to, go in and kind of open a can of whoop on Florida and finally make that statement that they have not managed to make to this point this season. And I look for, the clock is coming to zero on Napier. It wouldn't shock me if this is his last game as the Gators coach.
There were those that are heavily invested in terms of emotionally with the Gators and followed their program that thought Napier would be gone after the Miami game. That offense was completely inept. It may as well have been FAMU, Florida A&M, out there against the Canes. DJ Lagway did nothing. I didn't even know that Florida had wide receivers after watching that game. And it was just incredible, as you mentioned earlier, that they got that one drive centered around one big run, but did nothing in the passing game the entire time. Surprisingly, they were still in the game, but their offensive prowess is non-existent. As
Again,
evidence too, I mean, Miami puts up 40-something on South Florida, and they were losers, 16-15 in that game.
if you were going with the Gators are going to get it up for the coach, blah, blah, blah. Well, the way you win those games is with defense in the running game. And the bad news is Florida can't run the football either.
Sure.
And again, yes, they did play LSU, but we saw against Ole Miss, LSU's defense is not the most impressive, and they played Miami. But, at the end of the day, as much as people want to talk about, well, that was a closer game, Miami still won the game by 19 points. They basically won the game by 3 touchdowns.
Yes.
It wasn't like at the end of the day that was actually a close football game. And, when the Gators made it close, Miami just ran the ball down their throats and, got a touchdown to put the game on ice. You'd have to show me where anybody thinks anything positive of Florida at this point of the season on the offensive side of football. Now, again, the defense isn't bad, but they wore out against USF. They wore out against Miami. You can't convince me they're not going to wear out again in Texas, particularly playing in the swamp for a 3:30 start.
All right, so we have Texas laying 5 and a hook on the latest line I saw over Florida. And you say get involved as soon as you can because maybe people will come to their senses on
No,
that.
that's not the one I say get
Oh,
involved.
yeah.
It's the other game, Alabama and Vandy, which keeps trending up.
Okay.
That one I could see swinging down. Florida, the momentum seems to be entirely with Florida with the betting population and just basing it on all these people I see picking the Gators. I actually wouldn't be surprised if that number goes down today. It may surge as you get close to game time, but I wouldn't be surprised if you got at least it down to 5, if not 4 and a hook.
All right, so hold on, people. Hold on to your
Keep
wager.
your eye on it today.
Get to post time. And lastly, you're looking at Clemson and North Carolina, and you're looking at this in a very favorable light for those that
I feel
want to raise the point.
suicidal about this because I
Yep.
swore after week 1, no more Dabo ever. And should have gone with you on Syracuse because you were asking me, can Mike Hughes give them a run for their money? And I was like, I don't think so. So, of course, Syracuse went out and kind of whipped Clemson's ass at home.
Yes.
But North Carolina is just an awful football team. And you're going to say they're 2-2. Yes, they're 2-2 by means of playing Charlotte and Richmond. The 2 games they played against Power 5 conference, they lost 48-14 to a TCU team that kind of got pushed around by Arizona State in the second half last week, and they lost 34-9 against a not particularly good UCF team. Just material on the field. You look at North Carolina, there's nobody on that team I would particularly want on my football team. And Clemson, for all the faults with Dabo, and there are many, I personally think Dabo's another guy who probably needs to go for the good of the program. There's a lot of raw material. I mean, there's 3 defensive linemen who are going to be first or second round draft picks. There's a couple of offensive linemen that are going to be second or third. Whatever you think of Klubnik, and I don't necessarily think the world of him, he's the better quarterback. Like Clemson's better all across the board on a North Carolina team that just does not have the material.
Who's more likely to dump Belichick first, North Carolina or Jordan Hudson?
North Carolina. No, really. If you're North Carolina, the amount of money you're paying for him, and
Yes.
you look at what's on the field, and the fact that, like, the dude's, what is he, 73, 72, somewhere around there?
Yeah.
Not necessarily the guy you think is going to go in and recruit real well. And then you look at his draft history. Well, for a guy who's going to probably depend hugely on the portal, maybe not the greatest history as a talent evaluator. In a brand new era of college football, you're throwing it back to a guy who's, the style of 20 or 25 years ago. Plus, he's already given her like $9 million worth of houses. So I don't think she's going anywhere anytime soon, because I don't think she's latching on to the upgrade in that situation. I don't think it'll be this year, but unless there's a huge improvement in the talent level next year, and at North Carolina, that's going to be kind of questionable, because that's one of the schools, along with Kentucky, who's going to put a lot of that booster money into basketball. So there's a more limited pool for football than most schools. How long are you going to pay this guy? What's
he making, like $10 million a year?
I was going to say,
yeah.
High 7, low 8 figures. And, I don't know if there's a formal agreement to make his kid the next head coach, but that at least there's got to be a handshake deal on that. How long are you going to ride this ship if you're North Carolina? Particularly, again, we've talked about one of the things in the NFL is you don't see those blowouts. Even if you're bad, you don't get blown out week after week after week. College, it happens all the time.
This is some serious ugliness. All right.
And because of the girlfriend, it's an embarrassment too. Like you are a national laughingstock because of the girl. I mean, we saw it against UCF. She's down there right at kickoff, like giving him a big hug, like his daughter asking him for some money for the concessions.
More like granddaughter.
Right? Are we going to go to Disney after? Like,
I want to go on the Magic Mountain ride.
Yeah,
for sure. All right, so recapping here, slight lean to the over, not necessarily a big commitment in the UM-FSU game, possible lean towards UM to cover the 4 hook. Iowa State, these are the official Professor plays, getting 1.5 from Cincinnati. Alabama, 11.5. Incomprehensible how Florida is only a 5.5-point dog, likes Texas to win that at the Swamp. And Clemson with Dabo rebounding from what's been a real poor start to the season, taking advantage of the quasi-homecoming game by beating North Carolina and beating them handily, laying 14 and a hook. Professor, always a pleasure, my friend. Good luck with your plays, and thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.
You have a great one, Def.
The Professor, ladies and gentlemen, and some college football plays. I hope you guys have a very prosperous weekend on tap here, college and the pros, for the Professor and our good buddy Mike Jones, who joined us a couple of times this week. Enjoying everything that's going on. You have baseball cranking up again on Saturday with the divisional series. Should be a lot of fun. And, of course, a lot of college football action and the NFL as well. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time, the next edition on Monday's edition of Bury Your Bookie.